Welcome back to the Why So Serious show. Roland Lazenby joining us. He is the author of Blood on the Horns and Michael Jordan, The Life. Blood on the Horns is about the 1997-1998 Chicago Bulls Last Dance season. And with the Last Dance documentary just coming out, I wanted to bring on Roland. So Roland, first off, what were your thoughts on the documentary? Was it accurate? Was it Michael Jordan propaganda? I know Ken Burns came out and, criticized it for having Michael Jordan involved in actually making the documentary. So what were your thoughts on it, knowing so much about that team?
I was awed by the resources, obviously, of NBA Entertainment. I was there when the original footage was being shot. Powerful in itself, all the behind the scenes footage. But then you had all the power and influence of an official project. This is obviously the executive producers were MJ's people. The reason the footage wasn't released earlier is that Michael wouldn't allow it. And so guys like me, I wrote a 700-page book on Jordan's life. Guys like me have had an independent look at him. It is a fact of life today that wealthy, successful people like to control their own narrative. Heck, every one of us would love to control our own narrative if we only could. But when you get that kind of money and power, you have a better chance of it. First of all, MJ is a billionaire. He owns the Charlotte Hornets. That helped get him over the hump as a billionaire. He's obviously made hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of million in the shoe business. But I sort of subscribe to the idea that MJ is the star of the show. He made this happen with his insane competitive nature, with everything he did to force the agenda to win those 6 championships. He became the star of stars. My book, Michael Jordan, The Life, is published in 16 languages around the globe. Now, I'm sure there's some real Roland Lazenby fans out there. There might be at least 50. But for it to be published in all those languages, that's just a tiny indication of the great power that Michael Jordan has. So if he wants to tell his story, and he's done it in several books, but he's really answering my book and other books written about him, Sam Smith's book, The Jordan Rules. A lot of this show was really answering those things and providing his take on things. I think where you have to applaud Jason Hare, the director, is that he really got Jordan to be pretty forthcoming about his own narrative. Now, there were things left out. Pardon me. There were things left out. But, there were certain things Nike wasn't going to do. It wasn't going to show Sonny Vaccaro, although they did 2 hours of interviews with Sonny Vaccaro. Not a penny of that dropped. None of that was on the air because Sonny was fired in 1991. He's the one that championed Nike signing Michael Jordan to that fabulous contract they did. No one else had that idea. Sonny drove that. And I established that beyond a question of a doubt. And they interviewed him, but Nike's not going to allow Sonny Vaccaro to get on their documentary. Michael's a full partner in Nike. They did that. They didn't realize that when they gave him that fabulous contract as a rookie, they were making so much money they couldn't get rid of Michael. And there was a time that Phil Knight wanted to. And so this is sort of a complicated answer. Yes, Michael Jordan is, with The Last Dance, obviously still controlling a lot of his own narrative. But the brilliance of it, in addition to all the things there, is that the director got him to to be really forthcoming on a lot of key issues. And some things were just ironically forthcoming. The treatment of Jerry Krause. They only gave a little taste of that. And in a lot of ways, Jordan was settling arguments that were unfair. But there were other things that were disappointing. Ron Harper, just so important to those Bulls teams, those second three-peat teams. And they couldn't have done it without him. And yet, I guess he got a little screen time. I don't think so. George Mumford, the psychologist and mindfulness guy who taught Michael Jordan to be in the moment. That's a big part of this story. So you can offer criticism. On the other hand, there on full display was that 50 caliber asshole that is the great champion, Michael Jordan. And if he hadn't been a 50 caliber asshole, they probably wouldn't have won any of those titles. And we wouldn't be having this discussion, and there would be no Last Dance. And he bullied and abused and terrified the entire NBA. He's that kind of personality. And he did that to his teammates. He did it to the general manager of the team. He drove the whole show. And when Blood on the Horns came out, Jeff Van Gundy was coaching the New York Knicks. And so he went and bought 15 copies and gave them to all his players. And he said, look at this. This is what it takes to be an NBA champion. You have to be willing to piss off everybody every single day to get it done. And that's well and good. I was happy to sell, I was happy he went to a bookstore and bought the 15 copies. It doesn't matter. You cannot be Michael Jordan. I don't care. You could read that book 55 million times and you would not be able to be the organic 50 caliber asshole that is Michael Jordan. It's like Phil Jackson told me when I first started doing stuff with the Bulls. He said, you can't imagine the powerful feeling of being in a building somewhere and Michael is on your team and you're just going to kick ass. But he says, then come the times between the games. You're on the bus or at the hotel or at practice. He can't flip that switch off. He can't flip off that competitive stuff. And that's when it's hard to take. And of course, I have to add one final thing to this, and I'm sorry for this long answer, but everybody assumes that Kobe got where he did. These are the people with the superficial understanding of it by copying Michael Jordan. Now, I wrote a 600-page book on Kobe, and I wrote one when he was a young player, and I spent a lot of time with him. You don't copy. That's not a code that you can hit copy on your computer. That has to be organic. That's your soul. Kobe was in high school, in season, practicing, and he's getting up at 5 a.m. and getting up teammates with him because practice wasn't enough. They were going to the gym at 5 a.m. Now, this is maniacal stuff. Parents at Lower Merion were looking around going, what are you guys doing? You just had practice last night. What, you're going in this morning again? And people don't understand. But when Michael got to the NBA at 21, he immediately put pressure on all the veterans at the Bulls. He was abusing them, dunking on them in their faces. Kobe Bryant came in at 18. He went to a veteran Lakers team. There were no kids in the NBA when Kobe went in. And immediately, what was he doing? Putting pressure on him. He was going to dunk on your ass in practice. He was going to do stuff that embarrassed you. And they're just people like that. You occasionally run into them playing ball at the Y. There used to be this lineman in Roanoke, like a lineman for the county doing climbing telephone poles and stuff. And this guy had played football at Bluefield State, and he liked to come down to the Y about once every 2 weeks. And he'd get in the morning and drink like 6 to 8 beers and get and he would come down there and he would bowl over everybody in the room. He was a maniac. Now, he obviously had none of the artistry of a Jordan or a Kobe, but he had that thing, where you have to stop and ask yourself, do I want to be here? And Jordan could have that effect on the NBA floor. He intimidated. Now, there were certain teams he didn't intimidate, but he intimidated a lot of them. He didn't intimidate the bad boys. They beat the crap out of him. He didn't intimidate the Celtics, nor the Lakers, but he intimidated a lot of other teams. That's a long answer.
It's totally warranted. Very entertaining. Scottie Pippen's portrayal in the documentary, I very much thought that it wasn't exactly showing Scottie in the best light until maybe the last episode, where they were like, okay, Scottie played through a back injury. But is that just Jordan's kind of, I've got to make sure that I'm the top guy here still in this documentary? Like, what did you make of Scottie Pippen's portrayal in that documentary?
Well, Jordan spent a lot of his career really angry with Scottie. But I have to explain it with 2 words: Central Arkansas. Scottie was a kid that went to college as the team manager. And when he got there, he just grew. And he had all this athleticism, obviously these very long arms, which NBA scouts have always looked for, and he just could do everything. And, all the NBA scouts were aware of him, but Jerry Krause was willing to put it all on the line and draft Scottie, make the trade to get him. And Scottie was what you'd expect out of Central Arkansas for a kid who'd come to college as the team manager. He had a lot of qualities, but it's things like, and Scottie and Horace, who was also one of those top picks, they were very close friends, and they would do things like miss practice and come in late, and with the excuse that Scottie's cat had died, and they wanted the whole team to have a moment of silence for Scottie's cat, and everybody's going nuts, Phil would pit Scottie against Michael in those early years in practice. And Scottie grew up just being abused by Michael. And Michael needed help. When Scottie was the full-blown version of Scottie, he had this tremendous ability to take all this pressure off of Jordan. See, Jordan made himself great by taking all this pressure on himself. And then he had to make others worthy, and he put all kinds of hurt on them and pressure and abuse to make sure that they really could handle it. And as Jerry Krause told me, Michael, I would bring draft picks in, and I'd think they were tough enough to stand up to Michael, and he'd chase them right out of there. They couldn't stand up mentally to Michael's abuse. And their confidence couldn't get basketball's really big confidence game. And Scottie fought his way through the abuse. They were getting beat up by the Pistons every year. And Scottie got better and better and came to Game 7 of 1990. And Scottie came in with a migraine and said he couldn't see and couldn't play. Game 7, with this long-term battle with the dastardly Pistons. And they had beaten the living crap out of him, but all Scottie. And Michael was just furious. He said, fuck him, let him play blind. And, right there, I mean, that was Michael. And Scotty, over time, became the man. And, when Michael left, Scotty became the leader of that team. He was the man. And he had paid a dear price to be the man of that team. And, he was very resentful that they came in and made such a big deal over Tony Kukoc, who's a marvelous player. But Tony hadn't had to walk that hard road. And, they got to that moment. Pippen was a guy who had always felt disrespected. And he thought, I've carried this team. We essentially had the same record as we had with Jordan in the regular season. And we're now here in this showdown. And I'm the guy who's done that. And you're not going to let me take the shot. And he made a bad decision. How did it sat out? Now, he says he probably wouldn't change his mind if he had it to do over. I think he's just being truthful. Anybody who's ever been disrespected or felt disrespected, and you got a chance to look at the difficult family situation Scotty came out of. And I just, it was a terrible thing to do in terms of basketball and competition. I don't make light of that. But I've seen Scottie Pippen just play so marvelously and be without Scottie Pippen, that never happens. None of that success happens. He had to grow up the hard way. And so I just can't easily attack the guy. He made a mistake, but it was genuine. It was how he felt. And it was a terrible thing, but hey, they won 6 championships. It didn't really hurt anything. But Michael always had ambivalent feelings about Scotty, but he did about everybody around him. He was always scorching them, just frying them up.
He talked about Michael Jordan, one of my favorite moments, if not my favorite moment in the entire documentary, was when he said, Brian Russell, I added him to my list. So that just made me, I was like, okay, I get it now. Like, he had a mental list of just people that he needed to take out. First off, just was basically everyone he played on that list. And number 2, was Scotty on that list?
Oh, I think anybody who, you didn't have to do anything. George Mumford, I said, was the team psychologist. He's like, I started the Chicago Tribune book division, hired me to write a history of the Bulls in 1993. And so I came in between the 2 three-peats and started, I spent basically 5 years there writing books about the Bulls. And, George Mumford, the team psychologist, came in at that time. And when Jordan returned in March of 95, it was a big deal. And George was in practice to begin watching Michael. Some of the first times he observed him. And George roomed with Dr. J at UMass. George had played his own basketball. He's out of Boston. He's not he's a brilliant man. He's read every book probably there is. And he is just, he's a very important guy to Kobe, was to Kobe and Michael. I introduced him to Kobe, actually, because Kobe needed that kind of help. But George went into Bulls practice, and he started watching Michael, who had just come back. And he was astounded. He couldn't believe it. He thought Michael was so hyper, so over the top. George Mumford said to himself, this guy's bipolar. Or maybe he's manic depressive. He's got these highs right now. Nobody can possibly be this focused, this insanely high in practice. And so George Mumford started waiting for the downside. When is he going to plummet? When are we going to see the other side of the bipolar or the depressive side of the manic depressive? And it never came. And he realized that this guy, you know, I played football for a year as a walk-on at VMI. Back then it was Division I, but freshmen weren't eligible. We scrimmaged the varsity every day. And I got in the zone a few times. Wasn't long, but practices, we scrimmaged the varsity. That was my Super Bowl. That was the full extent of my pathetic athletic career. But I did get to occupy that zone. And it's a rare thing. Anybody who has competed, particularly in a sport like football or basketball, you know, you just sort of get in that dreamlike state where everything is, you're playing at a super high level, just incredible energy, incredible. It's all psychologically driven in some ways, but it is that cherished state that these truly great athletes would love to get into. But George Mumford realized that Jordan could get there whenever he wanted. And he had all these devices. If somebody didn't say something to him, if something couldn't be perceived as a slight, it didn't matter. Jordan would make something up that would piss him off and elevate him emotionally to that level of focus. And George Mumford had never witnessed someone who could do that on a routine basis. And that really is part of when we say Jeff Van Gundy can buy all the freaking books he wants. You don't get people that can do that. And Jordan, as much as what he accomplished was physical, it's far more mental. And it wasn't just that. Dean Smith was astounded at the kind of listener that Michael Jordan was and is. I mean, the guy can really listen. And that's a hallmark of a lot of great athletes. You know, they don't frustrate their coaches. You have people who have lots of athletic ability that are, just sort of doofuses like me, who wasn't at that time in life a very good listener. And, you just drive coaches crazy. They don't trust you. But a lot of the truly great athletes are wonderful listeners.
And I hate to cut it short, but
I got to go. My wife's already getting ready to throw shoes at me.
I've got one more question for you, if you don't mind.
Well, that shouldn't take us but 30 minutes.
One more question, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Team in the past 20 years, Warriors, Lakers, whoever are these, more recent dynasties, Spurs, what team do you want to see with the Last Dance kind of documentary, in the next, few years come out?
I don't know. They've changed the rules so that you can't have Michael. One of the things they didn't show in The Last Dance is the triangle offense much. They sort of did a funny little thing with Tex Winter, but they didn't show the beauty of the triangle offense. But that's not allowed in the NBA anymore. See, they make you think that the NBA evolved past that. But what happened is they really went in and changed the time rules that made it impossible to run, not just the triangle, but other system offenses like Utah used to run, or like San Antonio has run. It's much harder now because the game is all geared at pushing up and down the floor, getting up as many shots. It doesn't matter that a high percentage of those are ugly. You're going to create more stars. It's made for people who don't watch full games, but are watching highlights on their phones. and they are making, the NBA is making a huge amount of money out of that, but it's a very cynical move. Of course, the NBA has been cynical. It used to not be able to sell tickets. I just am so frustrated with the NBA because it's almost like they don't trust today's players to be all they could be. I guess it would be the Warriors. I think the Warriors are fascinating. And the Warriors are the closest thing we have to a system offense today. That's way more than you wanted. I could do a full hour just on that, but I'm tired. I know whatever listeners you have, they've long left us because I get so maniacal about this stuff. But it's been fun. Those are good questions.
Thank you, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with you that about the shot clock thing. It's for me, it's just racked up the scoring. I'm someone that likes. I don't like a game in the 80s where it's just a slugfest, but I also don't like a game that's like in the, 140s.
Right. They did two things that really got rid of the triangle, and they did this intentionally because they were tired of the triangle winning all his championships. But they cut the timeline from 10 seconds, the timeline rule, to 8 seconds. And so the triangle, which is a two-guard front, couldn't set up. And then they cut the reset from on an offensive rebound from a full 24 to 14. So you don't have time to set up and execute. You could, but it's rushed and you're not going to have the same effect. And so they just said, we'll get rid of all this stuff and just, play to the phones. It's hero ball.
Yeah.
But, there's still a lot of drama. I just think there's a wonderful generation of players. And for them to do this, it's almost like they didn't think they could dunk enough. So they went out and put trampolines and gave everybody a volleyball instead of a basketball, and participation trophies. It's all sort of in that vein. These players today don't need that. We have people who are easily all-time great players. LeBron, so many of the people today, Warriors team, all-time team. They don't need these cheap devices. And in fact, Steph Curry or Clay could shoot. Doesn't matter when you run the clock. They're going to change the geometry of the game just with how they play. They don't need all that. That's their team is not really. Everybody takes advantage of the push, but anyway.
All right. Well, thank you so much for
doing
this. That was awesome.
You have a good day.
You too.